In 1958, deep within Kentucky's Appalachian Mountains, a secret so dark lay buried that it would remain hidden for decades. Established in that remote area since the 19th century, the Blackwood family maintained a practice that defied not just society's laws, but the very laws of nature itself. This is the unsettling story of generations of consanguineous unions, a story that produced one of the most impactful human genetics cases ever recorded on American soil. The Blackwoods lived on a remote 40-acre property, encircled by dense woods and guarded by steep slopes that made entry nearly impossible for outsiders. They had created a self-sufficient way of life, growing their own food and rarely venturing down to the nearby town of Pine Creek, which at the time was a community of just 800 souls. Sarah Jenkins, now 89 and among the last living witnesses, recalls what many in the region long suspected: they came to town maybe twice a year to buy what they couldn't make themselves. Always the same man, Augustus Blackwood, with suspicious eyes and pale skin. He never brought the family. The Blackwood name first appears in local records with Jeremiah Blackwood, who arrived in the region in 1871 while fleeing legal trouble in Virginia. Period documents note he was accompanied only by his sister cousin, who would later become his wife. Together they founded what became a dynasty isolated by choice. At that time, marriage between cousins wasn't unusual, especially in remote areas, explains Dr. Martin Calloway, a University of Kentucky geneticist who has studied the Blackwood case. The problem emerges when this pattern repeats over generations, exponentially raising the risk of recessive genetic conditions appearing. And that is precisely what occurred with the Blackwoods. For almost 90 years, the family maintained a closed lineage, with marriages taking place exclusively among close relatives, brother to sister, parent to child, uncle to niece. This web of relationships created a progressively compromised genetic code. By 1958, when events came to light, the family was in its fifth generation of consanguineous unions. The patriarch was Augustus Blackwood, Jeremiah's great-grandson, who controlled a property housing 27 individuals, all related in complex and close ways. The truth about the Blackwood farm emerged when a severe storm struck the region in March 1958. Flooding washed out part of the lone access road, forcing Augustus to seek medical help for injured family members. Dr. William Carter, then Pine Creek's only physician, was asked to return to the property with him. What he discovered there would forever alter his understanding of human isolation and the biological toll of inbreeding. "I will never forget that day," Dr. Carter wrote in his diary, uncovered only in 1982 after his death. The main house was large but decaying. Other small buildings were scattered around. Augustus led me to a converted barn where a young man of about 25 lay with a broken leg. But that wasn't what shook me. It was his appearance, a pronounced, recessed jaw, clubbed fingers, and obvious cognitive difficulty. While treating the injury, the doctor heard noises from the barn's upper level. Augustus tried to discourage him from investigating, but Carter insisted, saying he needed to check for other injuries. What he found on the second floor he described as a vision that will haunt me to my last day. 5 individuals, estimated between 15 and 40 years old, were confined in makeshift rooms. All had severe physical deformities, many could not speak or understand clearly, and some had extremely limited mobility. Hygiene was poor, though there were signs someone tried to keep them fed and minimally cared for. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. The science behind cases like this can uncover genetic secrets that affect all of humanity, including you. Understanding how genetics shape our evolution is essential. Confronted, Augustus Blackwood reacted with hostility at first, but eventually revealed a disturbing family narrative passed down for generations. He claimed the family believed they were purifying the blood through these unions, a distorted conviction framed as tradition. "My grandfather said our blood was special, that it shouldn't be mixed with outsiders," Augustus told Dr. Carter. "When the first different babies were born, we believed it was a temporary trial, that the next generation would be stronger." County records, though sparse, support part of this story. Between 1871 and 1958, only 7 Blackwood birth certificates were filed, a number inconsistent with the family's known size. Later investigation revealed many births occurred on the property without any record, allowing the most affected members to remain invisible to society. Unregistered births let the Blackwoods hide those with the severest deformities, notes one report. These individuals never attended school, never received proper medical care, and in many cases never once left the property boundaries. The Blackwood case represents one of the most extreme examples of voluntary genetic isolation in modern America, says Dr. Eleanor Whitney, an anthropologist who studied the case in the 1970s. What makes it unique is that, unlike other isolated communities that practiced cousin marriage out of necessity or limited choice, the Blackwoods did so systematically and intentionally for nearly a century. After the discovery, Dr. Carter faced an ethical and legal dilemma. Kentucky law already banned close-kin marriage, but intervening in an isolated community was complex, especially since many adults on the property had never been documented as citizens. After 3 days of deliberation, Carter reported the case to local authorities. Sheriff James Monroe, with 2 deputies, visited the property on April 2, 1958. His report noted of an intensely wary family whose members clearly had never interacted with outsiders and a troubling situation requiring immediate intervention, individuals with obvious medical needs, inadequate living conditions for those with disabilities, and clear evidence of forced isolation. Authorities removed 8 individuals from the property, all with significant physical and cognitive impairments. They were taken to Lexington Regional Hospital, where doctors documented conditions now recognized as typical of highly endogamous populations: polydactyly, syndactyly, microcephaly, severe facial anomalies, and multiple intellectual disabilities. What we're seeing here, wrote geneticist Dr. Howard Phillips in 1958, is the manifestation of rare recessive genes that, in a more diverse population, would remain dormant. When close relatives have children, the chance both carry the same harmful recessive gene rises dramatically. Younger family members provided disturbing glimpses into life on the property. Martha, then 19 and one of the few who could communicate clearly, explained how visibly affected members were kept apart. Mother said it was to protect them, that the outside world would be cruel. But I think it was more to hide them. Some I only saw when I brought food. Authorities faced an unprecedented situation. Most removed adults had no documentation, no birth certificates, school records, or medical history. Legally, they did not exist. The case sparked significant ethical debate. Living conditions were clearly inadequate, yet the family had developed its own rudimentary care system, and outside intervention meant traumatic disruption for people who knew no other reality. The Blackwood discovery exposed a flaw in our social system, says medical ethics expert Dr. Richard Branson. As a society, we assume certain practices are universally avoided. But this case shows that in sufficient isolation, communities can develop radically different norms, with devastating results. In the weeks following, authorities mapped the Blackwoods' convoluted family tree. Augustus, 47, was both cousin and half-brother to his wife, Eliza. Of their 9 children, 3 had severe deformities and had been kept in the adapted barn. The practice of separation had begun 2 generations earlier, when genetic issues first appeared. Robert Blackwood, a cousin who occasionally worked on nearby farms, gave a chilling account. It started with my grandfather saying our blood was special, that we should keep the lineage pure. When babies were born different, he said it was a test of faith, that perfect children would come if we continued. District Attorney Richard Thornton considered criminal charges against the adults, but legal complexities arose. Many practices began in earlier generations under less clear laws, and there was no evidence of intentional cruelty, only extreme ignorance and isolation. Media attention complicated matters further. When news broke, journalists descended on Pine Creek. The story, with its elements of isolation, inbreeding, and hidden relatives, captured the national imagination. If you followed this story, pause and consider the human suffering behind the headlines. These were real people, their lives shaped by terrible choices they did not make. Leave a comment with the word genetics to show you grasp the seriousness of this case. The Louisville Courier-Journal was first to publish a detailed article on April 15, 1958, titled "Isolated Family Reveals Dark Genetic Secrets in Kentucky Mountains." Though somewhat sensationalized, it offered the first public analysis of the case's scientific implications. Geneticist Dr. James Richardson told the paper, "The Blackwood case dramatically shows the dangers of repeated consanguineous marriage. Each generation increases the concentration of shared genes and the likelihood harmful recessive conditions will appear." The article included photos of the property but not the family, by court order. Public response was immediate. Letters expressed compassion, horror, and, disturbingly, morbid fascination. Social worker Mary Sullivan, assigned to help younger family members, documented a difficult transition. They are traumatized by the separation yet dazzled by a world they can barely comprehend. Elizabeth, 12, had never seen a television and thought the people inside were real, just very small. The 8 removed individuals were placed in medical institutions or foster homes. For those with severe disabilities, the future was uncertain in an era with limited care options. The Blackwood case prompted policy changes in Kentucky. Social services launched a program to identify and monitor extremely isolated families in the mountains. "We cannot allow another Blackwood situation to develop unnoticed," said Governor A.B. Chandler in May 1958. "We respect traditions, but not when they cause clear harm to the vulnerable." The state partially expropriated the Blackwood land to cover care costs. Augustus and some adults were allowed to remain on a reduced portion under supervision. Outcomes for those removed varied. The 4 most severely disabled were sent to Pine Meadows State Institute, which provided basic care but little integration. "They moved from one isolation to another," Dr. Whitney observed. "The difference was they now had proper medical care and decent conditions." Younger, less affected members faced attempts at integration. Martha and Elizabeth Blackwood were placed in a Lexington foster home and later attended a special school. Martha, showing notable intelligence despite limited education, eventually became an advocate raising awareness about the dangers of consanguinity. In a rare 1978 interview at age 39, she reflected, "I grew up thinking our way was normal and the outside world was strange and dangerous. The transition was painful but necessary. I now understand what happened resulted from ignorance and isolation, not evil." Scientifically, the Blackwood case became a nationwide study subject. In 1962, Dr. Phillips published a detailed paper in the Journal of Medical Genetics, analyzing the observed inheritance patterns. "The Blackwoods offer an unprecedented look at extreme endogamy's effects in humans," he wrote. "The anomalies confirm theories about recessive gene expression in isolated populations and help us understand genetic inheritance mechanisms." The article documented multiple conditions: polydactyly, syndactyly, cleft lip palate, microcephaly, prognathism, and various skeletal abnormalities. Blood analyses using period techniques confirmed high consanguinity, with patterns showing significantly more homozygosity than the general population, a clear marker of inbreeding. A particularly alarming aspect was the progressive severity of deformities over generations. Recovered photographs revealed a clear pattern of worsening physical anomalies. "What we're seeing," explained Dr. Calloway at a 1965 genetic symposium, "is inbreeding depression, the reduced biological fitness due to increased homozygosity. Each generation raised the odds harmful alleles would appear." The case also sparked medical ethics debates. Some researchers saw the Blackwoods primarily as a scientific study, others stressed the human tragedy and wondered if intervention could have come sooner. "There were signs," Dr. Carter noted. "People in town suspected something was wrong for decades but respected their isolation. This asks when respect for privacy should yield to concern for well-being." 67 years later, the Blackwood legacy endures. The original property, abandoned after Augustus's death in the 1970s, is now ruins reclaimed by forest, a silent memorial to a tragedy that unfolded far from society's eyes. Before her death in 2009, Martha Blackwood dedicated much of her life to educating others about consanguinity risks. She helped establish a foundation providing genetic counseling to isolated Appalachian communities. "What happened to my family wasn't just a personal tragedy," she wrote in her 1990 memoir. "It was a collective failure of education, social support, and outreach that let people live so marginalized they could develop harmful practices unchallenged." Later genetic advances deepened understanding of the case. DNA analysis in 1992 confirmed the family's inbreeding coefficient was among the highest ever documented in human populations, rivaling some historic European royal lines. The Blackwood case taught us that genetic diversity isn't an abstract idea, it's a biological necessity, says Dr. Jennifer Reynolds, a Johns Hopkins geneticist. When a population, even a single family, becomes genetically isolated over generations, the consequences are inevitable and often devastating. The story also changed how social services approach isolated communities. Kentucky's response program was adapted by other states with remote populations, emphasizing education and outreach without unnecessary intrusion. The challenge, explains Robert Thompson, head of Kentucky's Department of Social Services, is balancing respect for community autonomy with ensuring harmful practices don't occur in the shadows. Blackwood taught us that compassionate intervention can be necessary even when uninvited. The case's lessons reach globally, cited in studies of other isolated groups, from closed religious communities to ethnic minorities practicing endogamy due to culture or geography. What makes Blackwood scientifically valuable, says Dr. Calloway, is that it shows not just the outcome, but the gradual process by which genetic isolation led to progressive hereditary conditions over generations. Today, direct descendants who know their history often remain anonymous, wary of stigma. Many changed surnames and integrated fully into mainstream society. One descendant, who requested anonymity, shared, "I grew up unaware. Learning the truth at 19 was a shock. I sought genetic counseling and found that because my grandfather married outside the family, my risk of carrying harmful genes is no higher than average." The Blackwood case stands as a powerful warning about the dangers of extreme isolation and genetic ignorance. It shows how distorted beliefs can persist in closed communities, leading to practices that seem clearly harmful from outside but are viewed as sacred tradition within. This story doesn't end with the Blackwoods, concludes Dr. Reynolds. Even today, somewhere in the world, communities exist where marriage between close relatives is common, whether by tradition, isolation, or lack of knowledge. What we learned from Blackwood remains relevant and necessary. If you've watched this far, you're clearly engaged with this story. Leave a comment saying "watched here" so I can recognize you and know who truly appreciates these deep dives. Be sure to like and share this with others who might be interested in these historical scientific accounts of little-known genetic chapters. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next investigations into cases science is still striving to fully understand.